Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going to talk about how one simple piece of paper, the US dollar, ended up becoming maybe the most powerful economic force on the entire planet. So, to really get a grip on the dollar's power, you've got to ask yourself a question. How can just one country, the United States, have the power to basically bring another nation's economy to its knees almost overnight? Well, the answer is this financial weapon called sanctions. And the power of those sanctions, it's all tied directly to the dollar's dominance. Seriously, if you want to understand modern geopolitics, you have to understand this. When world leaders have tried to step away from the US dollar, things have often gotten intense. Let's take Iraq back in 2000. Saddam Hussein decides he's going to start selling oil in euros, not dollars. And what happens? Just a few years down the line, his regime is overthrown. And then you've got Libya. Muammar Gaddafi had this big idea for a gold-backed African currency to compete with the dollar. And, well, shortly after that, a civil war breaks out and he's overthrown. Now, these examples, they really drive home a critical point. If you challenge the dollar, you might find yourself challenging a military and nuclear superpower. Same story with Iran. They tried to sidestep the dollar with their own oil trading system based in euros. And the response? Bam! Crippling sanctions that just wrecked their economy. So, to really understand where all this power comes from, we've got to rewind the clock. Let's go back to the very beginning. Okay, so long before we had paper money, trade was a totally different ballgame. It was all physical. Let's take a quick look at how we went from just, swapping stuff to having a global currency. Okay, so first you had the barter system, right? Super simple. You trade your tomatoes for your neighbor's rice. The problem is, that's not very efficient. And hey, your tomatoes are going to go bad. So people switch to precious metals like gold and silver. They're durable, they're valuable, but try carrying a ton of gold around. It's heavy, it's dangerous. So that led to the next logical step. A merchant would hold on to your gold for you, and in return, they'd give you a paper note, basically an IOU, a receipt, that you could then trade. That piece of paper was a promise. And this whole system of promises, that's what became known as the gold standard. The beauty of it was trust. Every single piece of paper money was a direct claim on a real, physical amount of gold sitting in a vault somewhere. And here's the crucial part. The more gold a country had, the more money it could print, and that meant it could acquire way more resources on the world stage. All right, so at the turn of the 20th century, it wasn't the dollar that was king. It was the British pound sterling. It was the world's go-to currency, kind of like the dollar is today. But then, two absolutely devastating world wars came along and just completely redrew the financial map of the world. This chart really shows you a complete reversal of fortunes. It's incredible. While Europe was literally tearing itself apart, the US, for a while, stayed neutral. And it became the world's factory. It was selling weapons, food, supplies, you name it, to all sides. And it demanded payment in just one thing: gold. So as Europe's gold reserves just plummeted, America's went through the roof. And the result of all this, it was absolutely staggering. By the time World War II was over, 70%, that's 70, of the entire world's gold supply was sitting in US vaults. Think about that. Europe was in ruins, and the US was basically the only major economic power left standing. It was holding all the cards. So, picture this. The world's financial system is a wreck. And one country, the United States, has almost all the gold. It was the perfect position, the perfect opportunity to write the new rules for global finance. And you better believe that's exactly what it did. So in 1944, while the war was actually still raging, representatives from 44 different allied nations, they all got together in a little town called Bretton Woods in New Hampshire. They had one major goal: create a brand new, stable financial system. They wanted to prevent the kind of economic chaos that they believed had led to the war in the first place. So at this big meeting, the US makes an offer that was both simple and honestly revolutionary. They basically said, look guys, none of you have enough gold left to back your own currencies. So how about this? Instead, you peg your currencies to our currency, the US dollar. And we, the United States, will guarantee that our dollar is as good as gold, redeemable at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. And just like that, boom, the US dollar became the foundation for the entire global economy. But wait, it gets better. The US then played its absolute masterstroke. Just 1 year later, it strikes a deal with the new emerging superpower of oil, Saudi Arabia. The US offers them military protection, advanced technology, and in return, the Saudis had to agree to one absolutely critical condition. They had to sell all their oil to anyone, anywhere in the world, only in US dollars.
And this one move created what we now call the petrodollar system. I mean, just think about the logic here. It's brilliant. Every country on Earth needs oil to power its economy, right? Well, now, to buy that oil, they needed US dollars. And to get those dollars, they had to trade with the US or hold dollars in their reserves. This created a permanent, never-ending global demand for America's currency. And it gave the US this incredible, extraordinary privilege. It could buy real stuff from the rest of the world just by printing more paper. It was genius.
So for a number of years, this whole new system, it seemed to be working pretty well. But behind the scenes, something was happening. The US started printing way more dollars than it actually had gold in its vaults to back them up. And this led to a super dramatic decision that would absolutely shock the world. So by the late 1960s, other countries, especially France, started getting a little suspicious. They're looking at all these dollars floating around and thinking, wait a minute. So they started demanding gold for their dollars, which was their right under the agreement. Well, the US gold reserves started to drain, and fast. So, facing a full-blown crisis, President Nixon got on TV and made a truly stunning announcement. Yeah, this event is famously known as the Nixon shock. And here's an analogy. It's like you've written checks to everyone in the world, and then you get on the loudspeaker and announce, hey everyone, just so you know, there's no money in the bank to cash those checks. That is essentially what the US did. The world was furious. I mean, absolutely outraged. But what could they do? They were trapped. The entire global system was already built on the dollar. There was simply no alternative. Okay, so you might be wondering, how does the US keep this dominance today, now that the dollar is impacted by gold? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle is its, let's say, indirect control over a system called SWIFT. Now, SWIFT isn't a bank. Think of it more like a secure messaging network for banks. It tells Bank A to send money to Bank B. It is, for all intents and purposes, the nervous system of global finance. And having influence over the system gives the US an unbelievably powerful weapon. So here's how it works. Primary sanctions are pretty straightforward. They just forbid American companies from doing business with a target country, say Iran. But it's the secondary sanctions where the real power lies. That's when the US can turn to the rest of the world and say, hey, if you do business with Iran, we will cut you off from the entire dollar-based financial system. And since almost every major international bank uses this network, it's a death sentence. It's what experts have literally called a financial nuclear bomb. Now, as you can imagine, weaponizing the financial system like this has caused immense damage. And not just to the countries being sanctioned, but also to their trading partners who are forced to comply. And this right here is the exact reason why a growing number of very powerful nations are now actively looking for a way out, an alternative to the dollar. And look, this isn't just talk, it's really happening. There's a movement called de-dollarization, and it is gaining some serious momentum. China is actively selling off its US debt. Russia and Saudi Arabia are now doing oil deals in the Chinese yuan. The BRICS nations, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they're even kicking around the idea of creating a brand new shared currency just to challenge the dollar's supremacy. So here's the bottom line. Replacing the dollar, it's a monumental challenge. I mean, it is so deeply embedded in every single corner of the global economy. But these coordinated efforts we're seeing, they represent the single most significant challenge to its dominance in over 75 years. And that leaves us with the big question for the next decade. Will these cracks eventually shatter the foundation? Are we on the verge of a completely new financial world order? Thanks for joining this explainer.